Hi everyone, in this video I want to show you how to paint a bust, how to approach it as if it's the first time you've painted one. If you are like myself, you probably got into painting miniatures through Warhammer and you love Space Marines just like I do, and eventually you discovered this thing called busts, where it's just a face and they're very big, they're much larger than the face of a Warhammer model. Earlier in my hobby journey, I found these quite intimidating, and the idea of painting, a surface so large with just skin, I found it a little bit scary to try. And so in this video, I really want to give you an easy approach so you can just give this a go. I still paint lots of Warhammer myself. I paint large scale full miniatures and busts, and I think one of the best things about this hobby is just mixing it up. I probably only paint a couple busts a year, but when I do, I absolutely love it. It's so nice to paint something in this scale. I've wanted to make this video for quite a long time, and recently I had this bust sculpted for my workshops where I teach how to paint faces, and this was sculpted by Daniel, aka D Blue Ice. Check him out, he's a fantastic sculptor, and I wanted him to design a bust for me that was just easy to teach on, and he really delivered and smashed it out of the park. I'm super happy with this. This is a new product, so if you want to go and buy it, order it from the Cult of Paint website, then you can follow along with this tutorial. The idea is these are fun to practice on. They're not too big, so it doesn't take that long to paint, which is really nice. And also we've managed to get it at a price point where I think it's great to just give this a try. So yeah, please check it out. And if you're interested on coming along one of my workshops for the next little while, this is the one we'll be using. It will be a step up, a little bit more complex than what we're doing today. This is really aimed at those people who have never painted a bust at all before. Let's get stuck into it, shall we? The first job is the preparation, and these are resin. It's one piece, so nothing to glue together, which is fantastic. There are a couple things I would recommend when you're preparing it. First thing is to scrape off the mold lines. It has been in a mold, so there will be mold lines. And I tend to use a brand new blade. I like a really sharp one, and I can carefully scrape off the mold lines. And I'd also recommend giving it a light sand just to take away any slight imperfections, get the surface really nice and smooth and prepared for painting. This will also help the primer stick a little bit better. I'm using these God Hand 600 grit sanding sticks. I really like these. I do think they're worth the hype. They just go over the surface super nicely. You don't really need to go higher grit than this. They do an 800, which will really polish things, but I found a 600 was perfect for this. You also have to prepare the plinth because you don't get a gaming base with a bust, and I would recommend going to Taro Model Maker. I used his 25mm plinth. A 20mm would fit this small bust as well, but I thought 25mm would give some nice stability. I've got to drill a hole in this, but Taro does offer pre-drilled bust plinths, and so that'll be all prepared for you. And you can also add magnets, so this is a great service that he offers. So if you just want it done, the plinth turns up, you stick the bust on, and everything's ready. I would recommend that. Myself, I had to drill the rod, and I used a 3mm rod, so I used a slightly bigger drill bit at 3.2. And I also drilled some 6mm magnets into the bottom. For priming, I have gone for a light grey, and I would recommend the Mr. Hobby primers. They do spray cans and they do an airbrush one, but be careful, the airbrush one is pretty smelly. They are expensive, but I think they're really worth it. I probably only spray a handful of resin models a year, and having a great primer that I know is going to stick to the resin, it does make a difference. Grey Seer from Games Workshop is pretty good, but if you can, I really do recommend this Mr. Hobby primer. Okay, with the prep done, now we move on to the painting. And I think the biggest difference from moving from a Warhammer figure or a small scale miniature is you really have to start playing with lighting. If you paint a small scale face and you define the details and just paint everything neat and tidy, it's going to look good. But when we move up to a larger scale, things can be a little bit flat if we don't play with some kind of light and shading. If you're not sure where to start, I would recommend looking at portrait photos for some time. Black and white can be quite useful as well because it allows you to just see the light and the dark and just kind of see where the shadows are going to go. It's really important you have good references when you're starting a project. In case you get lost, then you've got something to fall back on and just check where you're going. There are so many ways to paint figures and busts. The possibilities for how we paint the light is kind of endless, but in this video I decided to keep it simple. We're trying to walk here before we can run and just try a bust. I think that you just want to get one done and under your belt, and then you can move on to more complex things. So today we're going to do the lighting from the top down, which is something I rarely do. I normally paint the light with some kind of asymmetry, it coming from the left, coming from the right, but I actually really enjoy doing this, and I think it suited this sculpt really, really well. To help me visualize what I'm doing, I took a photo with my desk lamp above the bust and just let it shine down, and I just took a photo with my mobile phone, and you can turn the contrast up just to try and exaggerate the shadows, but this really helps give me an idea of what I need to do when it comes to painting. I think one of the most important things to grasp is the point where the life will fall off and turn into a shadow. If you can get this line right, I think you've done one of the hardest things on painting the bust. What I tend to see is that people that have painted miniatures like Warhammer before, is they don't struggle with things like painting the eyes, the lips, the details, because they're used to detail painting. The big difference, and the thing that you should focus on in my opinion, is painting the light and just being a little bit more general. Try not to get focused and bogged down into the details straight away. We need to get the general view right first of all. You can see there are really bright highlights in certain areas, like here around the eyes, on the chin, the nose. We don't need to focus on this first of all. I think the first thing we need to try is to block out the areas that are going to be in shadow and the main areas that are going to be in light. You can see there's a line here that runs along the cheek where it drops down into the shadow, and we have some small parts of the nose on the sides that are also slightly darker. A big area is going to be underneath the nose, above the eyes here, and underneath the chin. So really the first thing I want to do is go ahead and block in these parts with our shadow color, and we'll work from there. Okay, let's finally get stuck into the painting. Try not to worry on what paints you use for this. Just see what you have and, work it out. Cadian Flesh is probably the most popular flesh paint on the planet, and yeah, that's a good one. It's absolutely fine. I might use some Vallejo, some AK, some Citadel. It really doesn't matter here. I would just try and pick whatever paints you have, and that'll work for this one. I'm going to use Night Quester Flesh from Citadel. This is quite a nice natural pinky brown colour, and I think it's great for shadows in skin. It's not the darkest, but I think it's often best to start not really dark, and it's so much easier to darken things down, but it does take a few layers to lighten it up. So I think this is a good start and it'll work well for our shadows. If I want it to be darker when I finish painting the highlights, I can easily darken it up, but I think this one is going to be dark enough for our shadows. You can see in the camera here, I'm turning the bust and you can see the line that we're trying to paint. And I start with my Night Quester Flesh and I try to start my brushstroke along this line and kind of work away. It's going to look really patchy and not great for the first few layers, but you just have to really let them dry and repeat the process. This is all about just blocking in at this point, so just try not to worry too much. Even though it's looking bad, I kind of move on and start working on the other areas. And when I repeat this and do the second or third layer of base coat for these shadows, then it will start to look good. I've diluted the paint with a decent amount of water. I would probably say maybe a third water to paint, something like that. But you can see here it's translucent. It's not like a wash thin, but it's not going on really thick. And I would rather just carefully build up probably 3 coats of this, something like that, just to get it nice, clean and clear. I go around checking my reference where I think the shadows are, like round the eyes. You can get this on the eyelid at this point as well. It's quite good to define the eye from the eyelid at this point. So when you paint the eyes, you've kind of already made that mistake. And then I hit the sides of the nose and underneath it. So really, I'm just checking back on that reference, seeing any of the shadows and checking back with my bust and making sure I've got them all done. And yeah, it's not looking great at this point, but I know in the end it will. I guess when you haven't tried it before, then you have to have the faith at this point, because it is going to look a little strange. And I think it's hard to imagine it looking amazing when you just have these, these rough brush strokes and things like that at this point. So I guess trust in the process is the cliche at this point. Okay, so we're back to this side. The paint has dried and you can see it's a little bit sketchy, but I'm just going to start that again. And I'm making sure I'm accurate, starting exactly where I want. I'm trying to find that line where the shadow begins. And on this second coat, it's already looking a lot better. I do think it's best to do your brush strokes away from the light, and that's just going to not form any strong lines that are difficult to blend later on. It looks so much better with the second coat, but I definitely think it's going to need 3. And don't worry about having that line super straight. We can always correct that later. And I can be a little less careful on the neck because I know I just need to block that in. I'm just being a little bit more accurate by the cheeks because I really want that line to look exactly in the right spot. And I just repeat the process, darkening all the same parts that I did. And yeah, I did this another time, 3 times, just to make it nice and clear. It's worth noting as well, I'm using a size 1 brush from Artis Opus for this. You could use a larger one. I basically used a size 1 and painted everything with this. So I did all the details and everything, and a size 1 was versatile enough for that job. But you could use a bigger one, like a 3, and then change to a smaller one for the eyes and things. Now we have our shadows. It's looking a bit weird, but yeah, let's just keep it going, and I'm sure it's going to come together. And now I go for my mid-tone, and this should be a paint that you like, that's reliable, something like Cadian Flesh or Kislev Flesh, which is slightly lighter. And yeah, this is going to be something you can go back to in case you make any mistakes. And all we're going to do is paint all the parts that are left in the grey. It doesn't matter if there's a line and we go over the line with this paint. I've diluted it with a decent amount of water again, so it's not going to cover any of that Night Quester flesh in one coat. And when you're dealing with a big surface area like this, I used to find it quite daunting and really worried about getting it smooth over a large area. I'd say the key is to do a few brush strokes and then just leave it alone, let it dry. If it looks bad, it looks patchy, yeah, just don't touch it. Just move some paint around, let it dry, and then any parts that look bad, that's where you repeat. You can see whenever I touch the line, I'm going over and pushing it towards the light. So I'm not going to drag the light paint down into the shadows. I'm going to do it the other way around, try and push the paint into the light. But that's our first coat, and yeah, still looking a little strange, but I can see where we're going now. Onto my second coat now, and you can see I'm always moving that brush towards the light, just trying to get a nice clean base coat at this point. And I'm doing a couple brush strokes in the area, but then I'm just trying to move around, and this will make sure my paint just doesn't get clogged up, and I should get a nice finish. A smooth finish is different to a smooth blend, and being careful how you move the paint around will contribute towards this. Try not to worry about it being smooth though. This is your first bust, and it's just about getting the light in the right place and just trying it. So if you get lumps and bumps, the blending isn't smooth, it's just not important. It's about figuring out where the light goes and just trying it. I thought at this point it would be good to block in some other colors. It will help make it look better, having some dark areas, some other things blocked in. And I thought I would do the hair in dark brown. I'm using chocolate here from Mini Color, which should be out any time now. We're really trying to get those paints ready, but you could use something like Rhinox Hide, any dark brown that you have. And it's good here as well if I make a mistake with the hairline that, I haven't done too much to the skin, and it will just help me judge the shadow and light a lot better on the skin. The grey is so pale, it can kind of skew your perception of the values on the skin. I think as well, when you have a hairline like this, it's good that it's not perfect, so I do some small brush strokes with the point of my brush and get a little bit of that onto the skin. You don't want a perfect line. Even if it's sculpted like that, try not to follow the sculpt, just do the odd little hair that goes onto the skin, and vice versa. When you paint the skin, a little bit of that can run into the hairline, and this just helps it feel a little bit more natural and not a perfect line. A tough job is painting the eyebrows, but it is nicer painting eyebrows than painting them on a small model, I must admit. And for this, I used small brush strokes in the direction that the eyebrows would grow, but they're sculpted on here, so you just kind of have to follow that sculpt. And once again, it's really nice to get this done at this point and make the mistakes if I'm going to make them. But already, I think having the eyebrows and the hairline on is making the skin look better. And actually, just having a really nice flat base coat of skin looks good. We need to do some blending on the shadows, add some more highlights so it's not so flat. But I'm starting to feel better about how it's going. Now what I want to do is kind of diffuse the lines a little bit, which is another word for blending. And so I take my Cadian Flesh or whatever mid-tone and I mix it with my shadow color. I made a couple colors here, so Night Quester with a little bit of Cadian in, and then vice versa, some Cadian with a little bit of that in. Just some tones here on the palette that I can grab whenever I need them to try and blur these lines. I check my reference to make sure the line is in the right place and it looks realistic. And what I start to do now is kind of blend the two together. So I've started out here with the Cadian Flesh with a tiny bit of the Night Quester in, and it's a little bit too subtle. I made sure my brush stroke went away from the light, and I also have to see when it dries if it's dark enough. Sometimes you can put a paint on, it doesn't appear like you've done anything, but when it dries, actually you can tell. But you can see I'm just going over the line here, or more or less, and this is going to start to blend it together. Starting to slightly blur these lines will help it feel a bit more realistic. Going back to the reference, looking at the side of the nose, these are a shadow, but they're not quite as dark as, say, underneath the chin or even the side of the cheeks. They're kind of a half step in between, and this is where the tones you've just made can be really useful, because the side of the nose maybe doesn't need to be pure Night Quester flesh. Maybe it needs to be something in between, and this is where sometimes you need to judge having these half steps. It needs to be darker than the top of the nose, but lighter than underneath the chin and the other things I just used as examples. I then go on to use that second mix that I've made, so it's got a bit more of the Night Quester in, and I start actually painting that over the area I've painted in shadow. And this is going to define the jawline a little bit, and I'll just leave the Night Quester flesh in the deepest part of the cheek, so it's just creating that little hollow and creating a subtle little shadow here. This takes a little while, and you'll see the difference how it is painting over a dark color instead of how we painted in the beginning where we were going over that light primer. And there's a reason I prefer using light primers for everything, and it's, reduces the number of layers of paint I need and makes me get clearer colors. But this is absolutely fine working in this way. It will just take me a few more layers to get it nice and bright again. It's definitely looking more diffused, more subtle, but it's not quite perfectly blended, and we're not looking for perfection here, so that's not really the words that I want to use, but I still can improve it easily. I just want to tweak that one last little line here, and I'll just go back to the Cadian Flesh again and do some very small brush marks over this final line where there's the mix of the two paints and the Cadian Flesh on its own. I'm almost using a stipple motion here, so this is just using the tip of the brush to do small dots, and I'm not doing this for texture, but just for control, so I can really accurately just neaten up this line and try and blur it together. I'm also running down the side of the nose here and just correcting some of these parts. It's important that you understand where the muscles are on the face and how they flow around. And there are little parts like here on the nose. It's very tempting to do, a really strong line here, but this will age your character very quickly. And I would recommend just leaving this almost the same at this point, and we can get the definition with these things when we paint the highlights later. But you can see here I'm running my brush down away from the nose, kind of trying to flow with the muscles, and this will help make it look more natural. At this point, I'm just using my base coat again to neaten things up, just correct any mistakes I made with the shadows, as well as doing some blending. And once you've got this part done, it really is going to be a lot easier. If you can get to this point, I really think you've done the hardest work. This is mapping out the light, blending those big areas together, and once you start going into painting smaller areas, then it is easier in my opinion. I'm checking back on my reference, making sure the shapes of the highlights are accurate and just trying to tweak it carefully. It's good to sometimes hold the bust far away from you to make sure you're getting the general view right. Sometimes at this point, we're too zoomed in and focused on the small things, when the first thing you should get right is the bigger picture. But you can see at this point, we've only used 2 paints, and I think it's starting to look quite nice. We've essentially done the shadows and the midtone, and what we're going to do now is add some highlights. And going back to my photo, you can really see there are key parts where the highlights are going to be, and in general this is always the same spots on a face, depending on where your light source is coming from, but a key part is here in the eyes. So this is where the light is perpendicular to the surface and it's going to be brighter, so it kind of turns up in surprising places. Like this you might almost see as a recess around the eye, but actually, the light is hitting that, and we're going to highlight this part. Down the center of the nose as well, and these little parts either side of the nose. This is why I think it's important that you don't get a strong shadow line here. We can pick out this part with some subtle highlights, and that is enough definition. As soon as we make this sharper, more defined, it could work for a male face, but it will definitely age her. Trying to be soft and natural is one of the harder things when you move to this scale. When you're painting a small miniature, you can do quite sharp definition, strong highlights, and it will probably work, but we just have to have some softness when it comes to painting a larger face, especially a young female one. Other key parts to highlight are here on the lip, and we have to paint a little dot in the center, leave a shadow either side of that, and then just a little bit of a highlight around here. But the nose also causes a shadow, so that line won't run all the way up the top. This is where it's very specific to your light source and it gets quite complicated, but if you study enough, look at references, you can go and work these things out. And there's nothing wrong with working out a specific area, studying it, painting that little part, and then kind of moving on. This is how you learn, and once you've got these things locked in, you've painted a face a few times, you won't have to go back and study like this. You'll just know where highlights are going to go. But if this is your first bust, just take your time to try and understand really why and where we're painting this light. This is quicker than everything we've done before because we're doing a smaller area, and I do think it's easier because we're just gradually building up the light and trying to follow those lines. I keep going and pick out the light here on the top of the chin, and you can see how quick it is to pick out some of these parts like the side of the lip and grab that part around the bottom of the nose here. So these are all quite fast things to do. It's just about knowing where to go. And I think that's where it can be challenging and you can get lost. And trying to add things to the sculpt. Sometimes faces are overly sculpted, they have too many details. This one is quite minimal on the details, so it's up to us to understand where the highlights need to go, or it will look a little bit flat and boring. I start to cover a larger area here because I think I can build up a big area of light around underneath the eye. So yeah, I just do this a little bit larger, this highlight, and on the next step I will cover a smaller area. I add in more of my highlight color and I just follow everything I've done, covering a slightly smaller area. What we need to do now is keep pushing the light until we feel we have adequate contrast. And this is down to your taste. We want it to, not be flat and not be boring, but we don't want to make it look like a shiny metal or, something else. It needs to look like the material we're painting, which is skin. But with skin, if there's a strong light on it, that's slightly oily, we will get some specular highlights. And that's kind of what we're building up to here. I repeat all the areas around the face, and I also start to do a highlight at the top of the forehead. I'm going to need to match the highlights of the hair to go with this, as if the light is just hitting the top of this. Try to just think of this as a sphere, and even though we have the hairline there, the light is just going to run through both these parts, the top of the forehead and this part where it touches the hair. I've added quite a bit of light at this point, and it's really starting to pop out and look good. These are the more specular highlights now, and you can see I'm being really detailed, just doing small brush marks. And this is the bit I enjoy. I think doing the really big areas, it's not stressful, but it's quite time consuming, and you can't kind of see what's going to happen. But at this point, every brush mark you do kind of makes a big difference, and I think it starts to look really cool. So yeah, I just love getting to this point, adding those nice highlights, and everything starts to come together quite quickly. I like this methodical approach, just slowly building the highlights, taking a step back and looking how it's going, checking back to the reference, and yeah, you're just gradually carving out the light, and it is satisfying. I hope that if this is the first time you're trying it and you're following along with the video, you get this same kind of satisfaction. I would encourage you to try not get frustrated at any point. You need to finish your first bust, and if there are parts that you're not so happy with, you paint another one. But getting started and trying this out is the best thing to do. And I think if you've got a bust, you've given it a go, that's already awesome. So just try not to worry about how it goes and just be patient and learn from it. I also pick out the eyelids, and you can see there is some light running across these. You could do these in a different color or think about some makeup like eyeliner. There are many things you can do to busts to add a level of detail, but I'm just really keeping this simple the whole time to, just always remember that this should be a first bust. I'm kind of painting in a way that I'm thinking this person has never painted a bust before, and I'm just really trying to simplify it. And then if you watch any of my other videos on Patreon or you come to my workshops, there's going to be more complexity to it. But as I said, we'll keep to that cliche of just trying to walk before you can run. I think just get some light on, get it looking good, and the next bust you can do, you can add more complexity. Here I'm just correcting some shadows. I love doing this part around the nose. You can see I painted the eyelashes as well. These eyelashes are sculpted on, which I really like. It's just easy to see where you're going and block them in, and it does help make it look realistic. I also forgot to blend this part of the shadow around the eyebrow, so I'm just kind of fixing things at this point. I've built up my highlights, I've got things generally right, and I'm doing a little bit of refinement. It's good to do some refinement, but try not to drive yourself crazy. Just get it to look pretty good and move on to your next figure is my advice. This is just supposed to be a practice piece. We can start doing the details now and finishing this project off. So I start with the lips, and I took my base color, the Night Quester, and I just added a little bit of corn red in it, and I also added a tiny bit of the highlight paint as well, just so it's not crazy dark, and I blocked in the lips with this. The idea is to get them redder than the rest of the skin, but not so red that, well, it looks like lipstick, unless you're going for lipstick, of course, but I feel this character wouldn't really suit it. I gradually add in my highlight color the same way I've painted my skin, but it just has this little bit of red to it. And I'm just really focusing on the bottom lip because the light is going to hit that, and just try to think of this as a cylinder and do your highlights in the same way. I do small little brush strokes to try and emulate the texture that we get on the lips, but I don't need it to be too defined. It's probably going to be out of scale if I have really big gaps between the lines, but I might as well do my brush stroke in this way. You can push this highlight quite bright and do a really bright dot at the end to simulate that it's slightly wetter than the rest of the skin, and this looks really good, I think. You just need to make sure that it doesn't pull focus. If it's too bright, it could draw you away from the eyes or something like that, but it's a really enjoyable part to do. We can put some detail on the upper lip, but make sure that it still remains generally darker than the bottom lip. As it's facing down, it's not going to receive that light. I now move to the eyes, and I've still got most of the grey primer, and that's fantastic because we want the eyes to be grey, and I just neaten it up and highlight it with some AK medium grey. It's good to add some colour in, some blue or anything really to make it just not a normal grey, but this is going to be okay at this point. And I was fairly careful when I was blocking in everything around the eyes, just trying to neaten it up here and get a nice clean base coat. I add a tiny bit of red for the corners of the eyes. You could do the tear ducts as well, and I just use the same colour from the lips. It's good to have more variety in general, so I could have mixed a slightly different red, but I was happy using this one I already had on the palette. I'm going to block in the eyes now, or the iris, with some chocolate, and yeah, kind of a scary part, but because we have used that grey, I know I can fix my mistakes quite easily. And the trick here is you want a little bit of the grey underneath, but you don't want any grey above the iris here. So she's kind of slightly looking up. I do think it's easier to have them looking to the left or the right, but because my light source is top down, I'm going for a deathly stare ahead. And you have to forgive me, but yeah, I definitely needed to do this off camera just to try and get it not looking super cross-eyed. But yeah, always a challenge, but just take it easy and try and do them generally okay. Mine ended up looking a little bit wonky in the eyes, but yeah, it's good enough, I think. I then build up some colour with an orangey brown. Mornfang brown from Citadel is excellent, and you can just start to add in a slightly lighter brown. I'm using orange brown from Vallejo. That's a good one. But yeah, any colour, you just want to build it up into the bottom. And then over the top of that, we'll paint our pupil. Then after the pupil, finish by just doing a nice specular highlight. So you're going to do a white dot and make sure it's in the same position as all the light that you've painted on the rest of the figure. Like I said, I think you'll find this easier than painting the skin, and hopefully you're used to painting details on your Warhammer figures, and painting these eyes is a pleasure. I'm going to quickly paint the rest of the details, as this is really about painting the face. That's the part I want you to try, and I think painting the other details won't be as challenging for you. That's my guess anyway. You can let me know in the comments the bits you found the hardest. But for the hair, I think it's good to have that same mindset of trying to paint it very generally first of all. Try not to get bogged down into painting the individual hairs. It's more important that the light hits your hair just how we're doing the face. So that's why I just blocked in a big area of light. I'm keeping it simple by using my base brown with the same highlight color I used for the skin, and I'm just blocking in some areas of light based on the shapes of the head, and yeah, just trying to match that intensity of light I've painted on the skin. Looking at references for dark brown hair, you can see to make it look shiny, I need to push the highlights quite bright, and then areas of really dark brown where it doesn't have the individual hairs picked out so much. I sort of overdo it with the highlights just to block in some colour, and I know I can easily darken down any parts to get those shadows back, but I just wanted some paint on everything, some brush strokes. You know, I have a mix of some brush strokes picking out some of the hairs, but it just needs to be generally focused on the main shape. I then really push the highlights around the top of the head just to match where that light's hitting. And you know, the bun, the top of the strand of hair that's sticking out here, that just has a really tight little highlight. And I'm painting this fairly loose. You know, this figure isn't for competition, it's not supposed to be perfect. I want to enjoy it, and I actually quite like painting in this looser way, just moving my brush around, trying to get, you know, brush strokes in the direction of the hair, but not so focused on being really accurate. What I'm trying to do is keep pushing the highlights to find the contrast I want, so just push all the way, get it to look nice and bright, and then I'll go back and knock back any areas I need to, you know, blend it together, maybe define some of the hairs with the dark color. I'll just see how it works out, but I want to find my lightest color first of all. I grab that chocolate and I start to paint some small lines to pick out the hairs, but also darken big areas to make it look more like a shadow. And again, my brush stroke is mimicking the direction of the hair, and I'm using it quite diluted, so it just does a bit of blending at the same time as darkening everything up. But yeah, I think I'm going to leave the hair fairly loose. I quite like how it's looking. I could spend a long time refining it, but I'm just going to make it look generally okay. I'm happy with that. This was all about practicing the face for me. I forgot the ears. I always do that. And it's because I've been using this bust that doesn't have ears. It's got a hood for my painting classes, so I kind of forget. But I added a slightly pinker colour here with some salmon just on the ends of the ears, just to add a little bit of that kind of translucent part at the top of the ear. I then worked on the uniform and I just kept it grey, nothing exciting here. You could do some really fun colours here, orange, whatever you want to do. It's up to you. I kept it grey, so when we do the photos for the product, it's really all about the skin. And yeah, I just basically blocked in a light grey, gave it a bit of a wash to try and find the folds and the creases, and just picked these out with some highlights. And I tried to make sure the light matched the face, and we had a bit of a shadow from the chin, so we just had all the light kind of at the front of this part of the uniform. This was very fast. I just built up some layers and my brush stroke followed the folds, and I made sure they ended up at the bottom, just trying to draw my brush towards where the light's going to end up. And yeah, I think you'll find these parts easy compared to that skin. I think the skin is one of the hardest things to paint, and that's why it's really important to me to, you know, do these videos on YouTube and do tutorials. I really like to help people paint the faces. For me, it's my favorite thing to do, but I really understand how daunting it can be. I was there. I used to be terrified and not even want to give it a try. So all I want to do with these videos is to try and encourage that. It isn't too bad, and it is one of the most fun things to paint, in my opinion, after you've had a couple goes at it. I think having the details finished around make the face look better, And yeah, I kind of forgotten about all the things I wasn't happy with the face. I think now it's a complete picture. It just looks really cool. Now all there is to do is glue it into my plinth. So I do a little bit of a dry fit first of all, make sure I've got the right angle and that it's fitting nicely, and then I can super glue that one in there. It's quite a tight fit, so not going to need too much glue. And you'll need to paint the brass rod black as well, just to make it look really neat and finish things off. But that is super satisfying. I absolutely love finishing a project, but it's so great to finish a bust like this, glue it on its plinth so it's presented really, really nicely, and there you have it. That is one finished bust. I did this purely to provide this tutorial. You know, I wanted to paint this figure obviously for the box art and to make this video to help you guys out, but I absolutely loved it. I really, really enjoyed it. Credit to Daniel, I loved the sculpt. And yeah, I can see myself painting other versions of this to experiment and learn things. I think that's one of the other cool things of these practice busts, is that maybe I want to try some experimental lighting, some colors, and I think testing it out on a figure like this is great. So I really hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know in the comments if you've not tried a bust before and this is giving you what you need to give it a try. I hope that I've made it approachable. You know, for the skin, we just used 3 paints and I think it looks pretty good. There's way more complexity you can add to painting faces, more variety, you know, little bits of blue around the eyes, more color around the end of the nose, the ears, adding freckles and detail. But I think this is enough to get you going, and as you move further along in your journey, you can add these different levels of complexity. The first thing to get right is just to start thinking about light in general. Then you can just start to add these different layers of things, and yeah, just enjoy it. That's the only point of painting these miniatures. There's no pressure in having to paint different things, but I do encourage you to try stuff out. It's just fun. Please, you know, if you go and purchase this bust from our website, you follow along this video, even if it's in a month, 2-3 months time, I don't know, but come back and comment in the comment section here if you tried it. And yeah, I'd love to see people's attempts at their first busts, or even just some comments saying, I tried it, it was great, I've got over that hurdle now. And yeah, that's the whole point in the Cult of Paint channel, really, is to help you guys enjoy your hobby. And I really hope this video has opened up some stuff for you. Anyway, please leave your comments. I can't wait to see some people's first busts. If you want more from me, then I'm over on the Patreon most of the time, and I'll be doing occasionally figures like this. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and I'll catch you in the next one.